everyone, as regular viewers will doubtless already know, I started this channel with a view to trying to generate as much personal popularity as possible. That's why I always try and be middle of the road. I steer away from anything controversial in order to really just unite people around myself. This is something that, of course, most people lack the sort of social cunning and Machiavellian scheming to do. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about feminism.
How dare you?
Okay, why are we talking about this? Aside from my desire for universal popularity, the Financial Times released some graphs recently that were very interesting, showing the divergence of opinion between men and women politically in the age ranges of 18 to 29. Over the last few years, what you'll see is that men have broadly become a little bit more conservative. In the UK, they have been trending liberal and then plateaued. Other countries, they've maybe gone slightly more conservative than they were before. If you notice these graphs, all the men in this demographic still actually lean liberal, with the exception of Germany, which they're just about moderate, and South Korea, where they have apparently entered an interdimensional level of baseness. They are now glowing, levitating off the earth due to supping on delicious left-wing tears. But apart from that, most people on this graph are leaning liberal, including the men. Generally speaking, the polarization of our day is not between radical conservatives and radical liberals, it's between normal people and radical liberals, which brings us to the non-man portion of this graph. Ladies, what the chuff is going on?
What is going on?
And what this is a demonstration of feminism at a societal level. Feminism is correlated incredibly closely with political progressivism. And if you look at this graph, well, those lines for women, that's the average, right? So can you imagine that probably about half of the women who exist in that demographic are above that line of political progressiveness? What percentage of them do you reckon identify as feminist? It's going to be basically 100%, right? And I would say that it is on Christian men to defeat this movement. We're going to show you how to do it. But firstly, let's get a little bit of background information as to why this needs done. Okay, so point one, feminism was originally trash and then just got worse. One of the common misconceptions among Christians when they talk about this is that feminism was originally a good thing, that it was about equality between men and women, that feminism at its best is just about, educating girls in the Middle East or providing some opportunities for women that they wouldn't otherwise have, which are legitimate, right? And of course, as Christians, you'd be all for all of those things and no problem with them. But they imagine that the first wave of feminism, that was good, and then maybe it got a bit dodgy in the second wave and the third wave, we're not so sure about that. But broadly speaking, there's a fundamentally good core to this movement. That is completely incorrect.
Incorrect.
That's not true at all. If you look at the first wave feminists, one of the key things that they was anti-marriage. Now, I know some of them identified as Christians, or they even tried to bring in some biblical support for their positions, but they were, at their core, very anti the male-female relationship as God has established it. Susan B. Anthony, she described marriage as giving up one's freedom to become a man's housekeeper. That is a low, unbiblical view of marriage. Emma Goldman, who mentored Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, the greatest genocidal maniac in the history of mankind, she said that marriage condemned women to lifelong dependency, parasitism, and complete uselessness, individual as well as social. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another one of these first wave feminists, she had no discipline for her children. She didn't raise them well, but not only that, she had a spirit table. She had basically an 1800s version of a Ouija board where she would contact, let's be honest, demonic spirits, right? And these people are viewed as saints and heroes and often Christians. This is not a Christian perspective. So is it possible for women to be mistreated in a society? Yes. Has that happened in the history of the West? Yes. Should Christians stand against it? Yes. Is feminism the right answer? No, it has never been the right answer, even in the first wave. The aim of the first wave, one of the big aims, was to set men and women against one another politically and divide them, which is exactly what we're seeing play out in our day. So even in the first wave, feminism was a pile of garbage. That's what they created. Then in the second wave, they set that pile of garbage on fire. And in the third wave, they decided to start waving it around saying, yay, flaming garbage, yay, 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 yippee.
What? I love garbage.
Okay, point 2. Feminism is bad for women. The promise of feminism at every stage has been that if we would just get on board with that idea, well, then women would be happier, more joyful, more fulfilled. Life would basically turn into one long version of the girls just want to have fun song. Oh, girls, they want to have fun, so they really want. Now, has that happened? No, it hasn't, right? You see, instead of doing what women really want to do, even today, women today, when you ask them, they actually don't want to spend all their time at work. They actually do want to have families. They do want to marry and have children. They want to spend time with those children when they have them. That doesn't mean that's all they want to do. And women, I think, are also called to be productive. And you see that in Proverbs 31. It's not that women are called to be, lazy and do nothing and just decorative features around the house, right? And there can be a downside there. But generally speaking, these are things that women want. Well, feminism has told them that if they want those things, they in fact want something wrong, that they should be much more career-oriented than many of them naturally are. Feminism has encouraged women to be more promiscuous. It has encouraged them to be childless. It has encouraged them to be pro-abortion, to in fact murder their children. It has produced in women a much less happy life. They are much more likely to be depressed, much more likely to be diagnosed with mental health issues. Liberal women are incredibly mentally unwell.
Ruth, you just had to make it to 2021!
And worst of all, it makes them reject Christianity, right? Because feminism and Christianity are ultimately incompatible. These are two different religions, two different visions of humanity. So you cannot be pro-feminist and also pro-woman. Those things don't actually go well together. Feminism destroys women. Historically, that is what it's done. Feminism only likes women when they act not like women. It only likes women when they act like men. Okay, point 3. Point 3 is this. Young men are possibly going to be the solution to this problem. We're starting to see a turning of the tide by young men, or in young men, as is demonstrated in this graph. Now, we do have to be careful that this is not universally good, right? There are negative ways in which this can go. I would say the red pill movement, for instance, is broadly speaking a negative movement. Like, that's not a positive thing. I would argue that it's proto-feminism. It accepts the feminist paradigm. But at the same time, there is definitely something happening in terms of young men turning back towards Christianity. That is a thing. That is going to be a major cultural movement. I'm not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. I'm just looking at the stats and the timelines and the ideologies and going, I think there's going to be a major movement of young men coming back to Christianity. Let me point out something that's really important here. Gen Z is the first generation in pretty much forever where men are in fact more religious than women. Young men today are more likely to be religious than women. And my experience is that young men like this, who have rejected this feminist ideology, are extremely religiously open. I think they're very thoughtful. I think they see through a lot of the nonsense. I think they're looking for something grounded and secure. They're willing to take unpopular stances against the culture. And so my prediction is this. My prediction is that men in this generation and in generations to come are going to be essential in the fight against feminism. They are going to need to fight feminism for the sake of, in part, the women that are suffering under it. Okay, what can men do about this? Well, number one, right, find a non-feminist church. Here's a scenario that you're pretty likely to experience at some point in your life. You're going to have a woman that you care about, could be your wife, your sister, your daughter, whatever it may be. And they're going to experience something of a draw towards this ideology because she is a woman living in the, let's say, early to mid 21st century, right? And if you're watching in the year 2300 and machines have taken over the world and you're a nanobot, this may not apply to you. Hello and welcome to our mechanical overlords. Anyway, as I was saying, if you were to ask yourself, well, what could I do to make this infinitely worse? The right thing, the right answer for that would be, okay, well, let's bring that into the church. Let's ensure that the church embraces that ideology just as well.
It's worse. It's so much worse.
Now, I'm not saying that the church that you're in needs to be strictly perfect or agree on everything on this. But if that church, particularly check this out, the women's group in that church, if it is all sort of Yas, Queen, Slay, Beyonce, single ladies, right, that kind of feminist group going on there, if every message they talk about is about being strong and brave, if they ever at any point have said the words, release your roar, that's something to watch out for. If they have never talked about issues that women, in fact, actually face and do actually need to deal with, like if they've never said anything about gossip, if they've never said anything about this sort of toxic cult of self-love and self-obsession that is plaguing particularly women, that's a problem. Most women's groups in most churches, they're just Instagram feminism with a Bible verse slapped on it. That is something to be marked and avoided. And men, you cannot be in a church like that. Men need to leave those churches, and ultimately they need to find one that is, how do I put it sensitively, non-terrible.
That's awful. You're awful.
Okay, point 2. When it comes to dating and finding a woman, you want to find a woman who is, at worst, reasonably apolitical, right? That's kind of the low bar that you want them to get over. It's wonderful if you can find someone who has a robust worldview and has thought through all of these things and with whom you're very, very much aligned on everything. Given the default settings for women in the younger generations, that is increasingly unlikely, right? So you want to have some non-negotiables. Pro-life's going to be a big one. If she says, oh, you know what, I'm open to the idea of murdering my future children, that relationship should end right there and then. But if she says something like, oh, I think more tax should go towards healthcare and we could raise taxes to do it, and, you know, she's not overly passionate about it, she just kind of thinks that a little bit, well, that's not a deal breaker, right? Okay, I mean, it's not necessarily a great take, but nonetheless, not something to overly worry about. What you don't want, what you're not looking for, what you're trying to avoid, though, is the political activist, right? The hardcore, dyed-in-the-wool feminist who's trying to drive forward intersectional feminism at every point. If she shows up to the first date and she's wearing an I'm with her t-shirt, firstly, why is she wearing an 8-year-old t-shirt? Like, that's offensive. She should dress nicer than that for her first date with you. You should be taking her somewhere nice. That t-shirt would be inappropriate. But if she, you know, still believes that Hillary can do it, and, you know, you ask her where she's been, she's at a pro-Hillary rally, and you're like, I thought Hillary Clinton was dead. Is Hillary Clinton dead? Hillary Clinton could be dead, everybody. I mean, I don't mean that she's been declared dead, but perhaps her body is animatronically controlled and has been a robot the whole time. Anyway, don't marry a political activist. That is my broad point here, okay? If you're trying to find a woman, find one who is not in this part of the graph, the top right corner. Number 3, act like the head that you are. There's a bunch of stuff in here. You obviously need to be kind, you need to be strong, you need to be determined, you need to be chivalrous, you need to know your stuff. You need to know your stuff on this area in particular, even if it is not a threat to you. It is a threat to the woman in your life. And so you need to actually understand feminism and think about what you're going to do about it. But I also want to make a key point here when it comes to interacting with women who are wrong on this issue, but whom you're trying to convince. We have been given an incorrect picture of women in our day. Here's a scene that you'll probably recognise from a bunch of movies. So you have the 120-pound female action hero star, and she'll be taking on a team of 6, 250-pound special forces operators, and she'll punch one and he'll go flying, and she'll grab another one and throw him out of the room, which is just like real life, like weight and upper body strength and muscle mass and coordination. These things don't matter in a fight at all. Being the main character, that is it, right? / not. Anyway, we are given a picture of women as being tougher than they often are, and we sometimes think that that only applies physically, but no, it actually applies verbally as well. And I think one of the pitfalls that men can fall into when speaking with women, particularly ones that are wrong on this issue, is we can treat them like men. We can talk to them like we would talk to a man on these issues, which means that there can be a tendency to be confrontational, overly direct, sarcastic, just like you would be with a dude, which would be fine with a dude, but when you do it with a woman, she ends up getting hurt, getting offended, and your argument gets shut down. Now, it is fun to annoy feminists, and let's be honest, easy, right? It's not hard to do.
It's easy, very easy.
But nonetheless, sometimes it's okay to be direct if you're trying to win an argument. For those that are watching the argument, that can be a thing. But if you're actually trying to convince the woman that you're talking to, even if she's acting like she's tougher than she is, you will win her over better by treating her as a woman. You will win her over better by talking to her like she is, as the Bible describes, the weaker vessel, someone who is not lesser, but is more vulnerable, not just physically, but also emotionally or personally. You need to remember that she is still a woman, even if she doesn't seem to remember that. You don't want to deny their femininity in practice that you're trying to convince them of in the argument. That was a good line. We'll close with that. All right, so that's 3 ways that I think Christian men can defeat, and I think shall defeat, feminism. If you'd like to support the channel, go to Patreon and do that. There'll be a link in the video and in the description. And if you'd like to see how the church has turned off men and why the church has failed to reach men, this next video will be for you.